Sophia and I had been married for 14 years, and for most of that time, I thought we had a solid foundation. We weren't the type of couple who posted overly affectionate photos or wrote long captions about each other on social media, but we didn't need to. Our relationship was rooted in mutual respect, trust, and a shared vision of what our life should look like. At 39, I worked as a sales manager, a career I'd built steadily over the years. It kept me busy, but it also gave me the flexibility to spend time with Sophia when her work allowed. Sophia, at 37, was a travel consultant. Her job fit her perfectly. She had always loved planning, organizing, and exploring new places. Our suburban life was comfortable. We had a modest home with a cozy backyard where we often talked about future plans, maybe a vacation to Europe or finally tackling that kitchen renovation. Life wasn't perfect, of course. We had our disagreements, and sometimes we got caught up in the monotony of everyday responsibilities. But I always believed we had something real, something worth holding on to. That belief started to shift a few months ago. Sophia's job occasionally required her to travel for client meetings or attend industry conferences. It wasn't unusual for her to take a weekend trip, especially during peak seasons. I never questioned it because she'd been in the business for over a decade, and I trusted her completely. But recently, her trips had become more frequent, once or twice a month instead of the occasional quarterly getaway. She'd pack her bags with less notice, her explanations vague and rushed. "It's for a big client," she'd say, brushing off my questions. "This could lead to a major account for my agency." I didn't think much of it at first. I figured her career was just picking up pace, and I didn't want to be the kind of husband who questioned her every move. She'd always been independent, and I respected that about her. Still, there were small things that didn't sit right with me. Sophia started keeping her phone closer than usual, turning it face down on the table or slipping it into her bag when I walked into the room. When I asked her how her trips went, her answers felt rehearsed, like she was sticking to a script. "Nothing exciting," she'd say with a tight smile. "Just work stuff. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. Not anymore. Something about her demeanor was off, like she was trying too hard to appear casual. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself I was just imagining things. After all, 14 years of marriage couldn't just unravel over a few weird feelings, right? Or so I thought. Looking back, I realize now that the cracks were there all along. I just didn't want to see them. It wasn't until the day I found that receipt in her rental car that everything began to fall apart. I had no idea how much a single piece of paper could change my life. Sophia had just returned from another one of her weekend trips. As usual, she seemed eager to unpack and settle back into our routine. She greeted me with a warm hug and kissed my cheek, but her hurried demeanor as she tucked away her suitcase caught my attention. "Busy weekend?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Exhausting," she replied, kicking off her shoes and heading to the kitchen. The client was a little demanding, but I think we nailed the pitch. Her words felt rehearsed, as if she'd practiced them on the drive home. But I didn't press her. After all, why would I doubt her? Sophia had always been dedicated to her work, and I had no reason to suspect otherwise. Still, the frequency of these trips had been gnawing at me. They had gone from rare occasions to a near-monthly event, each one accompanied by vaguer explanations and a growing sense of distance between us. The next morning, I left for work early, as I always did. My car had been acting up lately, so I decided to take Sophia's car instead. When I got in, the faint scent of perfume hit me, not Sophia's usual fragrance, but something floral and unfamiliar. It wasn't until lunchtime that I noticed the receipt. It was lying on the passenger seat, partially tucked under a folder. I wouldn't have paid it any attention, except for the fact that it didn't match the story Sophia had told me. The receipt was from a high-end restaurant in a city 2 hours away, nowhere near the location she'd mentioned for her client meeting. The date and time also didn't line up with her itinerary. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an old receipt from a previous trip. Maybe she'd gone to dinner with colleagues after her meeting. But as I stared at the slip of paper, a feeling of unease settled in my chest. When I got home that evening, I casually asked her about the trip again. "How was the hotel?" I asked. "It was fine," she said, not looking up from her laptop. "Nothing special, just clean and quiet." I hesitated before asking my next question. "Did you have time to grab dinner with anyone?" She glanced up at me, her expression briefly flickering with something I couldn't quite place. "No, I just ate at the hotel restaurant." "Why?" "No reason," I said, forcing a smile. Her answer didn't sit right with me. The receipt wasn't from a hotel restaurant, it was from a downtown bistro known for its intimate ambience and fine dining. And if she wasn't there with a client, then who had she been with? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the receipt. I wanted to confront her, but I didn't want to seem accusatory without more evidence. Part of me felt guilty for even entertaining the thought that Sophia could be lying to me. But another part of me couldn't ignore the growing list of inconsistencies. Her frequent trips, her guarded demeanor, the receipt, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't fully put together yet. I decided to keep my suspicions to myself for now. But in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't the end of it. The receipt had opened a door I couldn't close, and I was determined to find out what lay on the other side. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The receipt stayed in my wallet, a silent reminder that Sophia's story didn't add up. Every time I looked at it, the questions multiplied. Why had she lied about dinner? Who had she been with? And why did her explanation feel so rehearsed? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed answers. I couldn't accuse her without evidence, but I also couldn't keep ignoring the gnawing suspicion in the pit of my stomach. I decided to dig deeper. That evening, while Sophia was in the shower, I sat at the dining table, scrolling through her social media accounts. She didn't post often, just the occasional travel photo or update about her work, but I figured it was a place to start. Her most recent posts were all innocuous, pictures of hotel lobbies, scenic views, and generic captions about another successful trip. None of them offered any clues, but something about the pictures felt curated. It was as if she'd been careful to share only the most professional, impersonal snapshots. I opened her tagged photos, a section she rarely monitored, and scanned for anything unusual. That's when I found it, a photo from one of her coworkers, taken during a team dinner a few weeks back. Sophia was seated at the table, laughing, her wine glass raised in a toast. Next to her was a man I didn't recognize, a man leaning in just a little too closely, his hand resting on the back of her chair. The caption read, "Teamwork makes the dream work. Celebrating a big win with our amazing crew." I stared at the image, my heart racing. The man wasn't tagged, and there was nothing overtly inappropriate about the photo, but something about his body language made me uneasy. The next day, I decided to go through Sophia's travel history. As a travel consultant, she often used a company portal to book her trips. I logged into our shared laptop and opened the browser, hoping she hadn't cleared her search history. She hadn't. I clicked through her recent bookings, my pulse quickening as I noted the dates and locations. Most of them matched the trips she'd told me about, but one stood out, a weekend reservation for 2 at a boutique hotel in the same city as the restaurant on the receipt. The booking had been made under her name, but it listed a double room, not the single occupancy she usually reserved for work trips. My chest tightened as I stared at the screen. This wasn't just a coincidence. That evening, I tried to act normal as Sophia went about her routine. She seemed relaxed, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "How was your day?" she asked as we sat down for dinner. "Busy," I replied, forcing a smile. "Yours?" "Same," she said, sipping her wine. "Lots of planning for the next quarter." Her nonchalance made my blood boil, but I held it in. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more, something undeniable, something she couldn't explain away. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized that the woman I'd trusted for 14 years might not be the person I thought she was. The idea was unbearable, but the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. I decided to keep digging, no matter where it led me. The receipt, the hotel booking, and the photo had all pointed to something I didn't want to believe: Sophia had been lying to me. But while suspicion gnawed at me, I still couldn't bring myself to confront her without absolute proof. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't deny. That weekend, Sophia told me she'd be heading out for another client meeting. Her explanation was rushed, almost dismissive, as if she expected me not to question it. "I'll only be gone 2 days," she said, zipping up her suitcase. "Shouldn't be anything too exciting." "Another big account?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Something like that," she replied, not looking me in the eye. As she left the house, I felt a mix of dread and determination. If she was lying again, I needed to know. I waited until evening before starting my search. I knew her laptop would hold the answers I was looking for, but I needed to be careful. Sophia was meticulous, and if I left any traces, she'd know I'd been snooping. Her email inbox was mostly work-related, filled with itineraries, client requests, and booking confirmations. At first glance, everything seemed above board. But as I scrolled further, I noticed a folder labeled "Personal." Inside, I found a series of emails from someone named Nathan. The subject lines were casual: "Looking forward to the weekend, dinner plans, last night was perfect," but the content was anything but. One message read, "Sophia, I can't stop thinking about our time together. You make everything feel so effortless, so right. Counting down the days until I see you again. Nathan." My hands shook as I read the words. There was no ambiguity, no way to explain this away as harmless. This was the proof I'd been searching for, and it hit me like a freight train. I scrolled further, finding more emails that painted a clear picture of their relationship. They'd been meeting for months, often during her so-called client trips. The hotel booking I'd seen earlier matched one of their weekends, and the restaurant on the receipt was another one of their rendezvous spots. I felt sick. 14 years of marriage, built on trust and shared dreams, and she'd thrown it away for, what? A man who sent flowery emails and took her to fancy restaurants. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to call her immediately, to demand an explanation. But another part of me knew it wouldn't matter. The emails spoke for themselves. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. Why hadn't she told me she was unhappy? Had I done something to push her away? Or was this just who she'd become, someone who could lie so easily, so convincingly? By the time morning came, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this continue. Sophia needed to know that I'd uncovered the truth, and I needed to hear her admit it. I didn't know what her reaction would be, but one thing was certain: there was no going back. Sophia returned from her weekend trip late Sunday evening, wheeling her suitcase into the house with her usual practiced ease. She greeted me with a tired smile, as if nothing was wrong. "Long drive," she said, setting her bag by the door. I'm starving. Did you eat already? Her casual demeanor made my stomach turn. How could she come home so calmly, so confidently, after everything I'd discovered? I saved you some leftovers, I said, my voice steady. Thanks, she replied, heading toward the kitchen. You're a lifesaver. As she moved around the kitchen, reheating the food I'd set aside, I watched her closely. This woman, my wife of 14 years, had been living a double life, and I was about to shatter the illusion she'd so carefully built. When she finally sat down with her plate, I spoke. Sophia, I began, keeping my tone calm, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, and she looked at me with a hint of confusion. Of course. What's on your mind? I know about Nathan. Her face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. The fork clattered onto the plate as she stared at me, wide-eyed. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the emails, I said, pulling out my phone and opening one of the screenshots I'd taken. The hotel booking. The receipt from that restaurant you conveniently forgot to mention. Do you want me to keep going? Sophia's eyes filled with panic. Adam, Don't lie to me, I interrupted, my voice rising. I've seen it all, Sophia. I know you've been meeting him during your trips. I know you've been lying to me for months. So, please, spare me the excuses and just tell me the truth. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Didn't mean for it to happen? What does that even mean? You didn't mean to book hotels, meet him for dinners, send him love notes. Help me understand, Sophia, because I'm struggling here. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain. It started out innocent. He was a client, just someone I worked with. But over time, we got closer, and I guess I got caught up in it. I didn't know how to stop. You didn't know how to stop. I repeated, incredulous. How about not starting in the first place? How about talking to me if you were unhappy instead of sneaking around behind my back? She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. I was unhappy, Adam. I felt invisible. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like I was just here. Like I didn't matter anymore. Her words stung, but they also enraged me. So this is my fault? I asked, my voice sharp. You cheated because I was working to support us? Because I trusted you to be honest with me? No, she said quickly, looking up at me with pleading eyes. It's not your fault. It's mine. I made a terrible mistake, and I hate myself for it. I'll do anything to fix this, anything. Just don't give up on us, Adam. Please. I sat back, shaking my head in disbelief. The woman sitting across from me was someone I no longer recognized. Her tears, her apologies, they felt hollow, like too little, too late. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, I said finally, my voice heavy with exhaustion. And without trust, what's left? She didn't have an answer. And for the first time in our marriage, neither did I. The days following the confrontation were some of the hardest I'd ever experienced. Sophia and I lived under the same roof, but it felt like we were worlds apart. The air between us was thick with tension, every conversation strained and full of unspoken pain. She spent most of her time in the guest room, leaving me the space I demanded after our argument. Occasionally, she'd try to reach out, a soft knock on my door, a text asking if I wanted to talk, but I couldn't bring myself to face her. How could I, when every time I looked at her, all I saw were the lies she'd told and the trust she'd shattered? Work became my escape. I threw myself into my sales reports, client calls, and meetings, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to what had happened. But even there, the weight of the betrayal followed me. I'd find myself zoning out in the middle of a call, staring blankly at my screen as memories of her tears and apologies replayed in my mind. Friends and coworkers started to notice the change in me. "You okay, Adam?" my colleague Greg asked one afternoon. "You've seemed off lately." I wanted to brush it off, to say I was fine, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded and muttered, "Just a lot going on at home." Greg didn't press further, but his concerned expression lingered long after our conversation ended. At home, Sophia tried to make amends in small ways. She cooked dinner, left notes apologizing for what she'd done, and even cancelled her upcoming work trips to prove she was serious about rebuilding our marriage. But no matter what she did, I couldn't shake the anger and sadness that consumed me. One evening, she finally broke the silence. "Adam," she said softly, standing in the doorway of the living room where I sat nursing a glass of whiskey. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for. But I need to know, is there any part of you that wants to try to fix this?" I stared at her, the weight of her question pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to say yes, to believe that we could somehow salvage the life we'd built together. But another part of me, the part that replayed those emails and receipts in my mind, couldn't imagine ever trusting her again. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice hollow. "I honestly don't know." Her face crumpled, but she didn't push me further. She just nodded and walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself questioning everything. Could I ever forgive her? Did I even want to try? Or was this the beginning of the end for us? The uncertainty was suffocating, but one thing was clear, the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Whether we stayed together or went our separate ways, the life we'd known was gone. And in its place was a future I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Sophia wasn't giving up. She spent every day trying to prove she was sorry, cooking meals, cleaning the house, even leaving little notes on my desk reminding me of better times. At first, it felt performative, like she was checking off boxes to win me over. But over time, I started to see something different, genuine remorse. "I want us to find a way back," she said one evening, her voice trembling. "I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything." Her plea was sincere, but I still felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. Trust wasn't something you could rebuild overnight, and the cracks in our marriage felt too deep to simply plaster over. But despite my doubts, I agreed to give it a chance. We started with therapy, sitting across from a soft-spoken counselor in a quiet, sunlit office. Sophia laid everything bare during our first session, admitting to the affair and taking responsibility for the pain she'd caused. "I was selfish," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I let my own insecurities and unhappiness blind me to how much I was hurting Adam. I'll regret it for the rest of my life." Hearing her admit it out loud was both validating and excruciating. I'd spent weeks questioning myself, wondering if I'd missed something or done something to drive her away. Her confession confirmed what I'd suspected, the problem hadn't been me. But knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. The sessions forced us to confront parts of our relationship we'd ignored for years. Sophia talked about feeling neglected, how my long work hours had left her feeling lonely and unappreciated. I talked about how her secrecy and dismissiveness had made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. There were moments when it felt like we were making progress, like the walls between us were beginning to crumble. But there were also moments when the weight of her betrayal felt too heavy to bear. One night, after a particularly emotional session, I found myself staring at her across the dinner table. "Why him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What did he give you that I couldn't? Sophia looked down at her plate, her hands trembling. It wasn't about him, she said finally. It was about me. I felt invisible, and he made me feel seen. But it wasn't real, Adam. It was a mistake, and I hate that I let it happen. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret. I wanted to believe her, but the doubts lingered. As the weeks went on, we tried to rebuild the life we'd once had. We went on dates, cooked meals together, and spent more time talking about our hopes and fears. There were moments when it felt like we were finding our way back to each other, but they were fleeting. The trust that had once been the foundation of our marriage was gone, replaced by a fragile sense of hope that could shatter at any moment. And deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this attempt at reconciliation was just delaying the inevitable. Despite our fragile attempt at reconciliation, a shadow lingered over everything we did. Sophia's efforts to repair our relationship were consistent, but so was the doubt that gnawed at me every time she picked up her phone or mentioned a work obligation. I wanted to trust her, but trust wasn't something I could force. And as much as I tried to convince myself that we were making progress, I couldn't silence the voice in my head that whispered, "What if she's still lying?" That voice grew louder one Friday afternoon when I came home early from work. Sophia wasn't expecting me until later in the evening, and as I walked into the house, I heard her voice coming from the living room. At first, I thought she was on a work call. But as I got closer, I realized her tone was softer, almost intimate. "I miss you too," she said quietly. "I'll call you later, okay?" My blood ran cold. I stepped into the room, and Sophia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with panic as she fumbled to end the call. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, my voice sharp. "No one," she said quickly, her cheeks flushing. "Just a colleague." "A colleague?" I repeated, my anger rising. "Don't lie to me, Sophia. Who was it?" She stammered, struggling to come up with an explanation, but her hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "It was him, wasn't it?" I said, my voice shaking. "You're still talking to Nathan." Her silence was deafening. I stormed upstairs, my heart pounding as I grabbed her phone from the nightstand. She followed me, begging me to stop, but I ignored her. "Adam, please," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think." I unlocked the phone, she hadn't changed her passcode, and opened her messages. Sure enough, there it was, a thread with Nathan, filled with texts that made my stomach churn. "Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing. I miss you. Thinking about you all the time." I threw the phone onto the bed, my chest heaving with anger and betrayal. "How could you?" I demanded. "After everything we've been through, after all your promises, you're still talking to him?" Sophia fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she cried. I couldn't let go. I didn't know how. Her words felt like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. "You didn't know how to let go?" I repeated bitterly. "How about trying harder? How about not dragging me through this hell just to keep lying to my face?" She reached for me, but I pulled away, the distance between us feeling insurmountable. That night, I packed a bag and left. I couldn't stay in the same house with her, not after what I'd just discovered. As I drove aimlessly through the city, my mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Had she ever truly been sorry? Or had this entire attempt at reconciliation been nothing more than a facade? One thing was clear, whatever hope I'd clung to for our marriage was gone. The second betrayal had shattered it beyond repair. This time, there would be no coming back. The days after I left were a blur. I moved into a small hotel room, far enough from home to avoid any accidental run-ins with Sophia but close enough to manage the logistics of unraveling our lives. Filing for divorce was the only option now, and though the decision should have brought some relief, it didn't. Instead, I felt hollow, as if the weight of her second betrayal had drained me of everything: energy, motivation, even anger. All that was left was a dull ache and a sense of loss so deep it was suffocating. Sophia tried to reach out multiple times. She called, texted, and even showed up at my office once, pleading for another chance. "Adam, please," she said when I reluctantly agreed to meet her at a cafe. "I know I've messed up, but I love you. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Her tears were genuine, but they no longer moved me. "It's too late, Sophia," I said, my voice flat. "You had a chance, and you chose him. Twice. I can't do this anymore." She sobbed quietly, her hands trembling as she gripped her coffee cup. "I don't know how to live without you," she whispered. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure how to live without her either, but I knew staying wasn't an option. The divorce process was as painful as I'd feared. Splitting up our lives, deciding who kept what, explaining the situation to friends and family, it was all exhausting. Most people were supportive, but their pity was almost harder to bear than their judgment. "I'm so sorry, Adam," my sister said one evening as we talked over the phone. "You didn't deserve this." I didn't respond. What was there to say? As the months dragged on, the stress began to take a toll on me. I couldn't sleep, my appetite disappeared, and I started feeling a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away. At first, I dismissed it as anxiety, but when the symptoms worsened, I finally went to the doctor. The diagnosis hit me like a truck: severe stress-related complications, exacerbated by lack of sleep and poor nutrition. "You need to take this seriously, Adam," the doctor warned. "If you don't start managing your stress, it could lead to more serious issues." But how could I manage stress when everything in my life was falling apart? The woman I'd trusted most had betrayed me, my marriage was over, and now my health was failing too. It felt like the universe was piling on, pushing me to the brink. Meanwhile, Sophia's life wasn't faring much better. Word of the affair had spread through our social circle, and she quickly found herself ostracized by many of the people she once considered friends. Her career took a hit as well. Clients began pulling contracts, unwilling to work with someone whose personal drama had become public knowledge. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was struggling, isolated, regretful, and desperately trying to piece her life back together. But I couldn't bring myself to care. The damage was done, and we were both paying the price. My health continued to decline in the weeks that followed. The stress of the divorce and the emotional toll of Sophia's betrayal had worn me down to the point where even simple tasks felt insurmountable. Every morning, I struggled to get out of bed, my body heavy with exhaustion and my mind clouded with despair. The tightness in my chest grew worse, accompanied by sharp pains that left me breathless at times. My doctor prescribed medication and urged me to take time off work, but I resisted. Work was the only thing keeping me from sinking further into the darkness. But even that escape became harder to maintain. My colleagues noticed the change in me, the weight loss, the fatigue, the lack of focus. "Adam, you need to take care of yourself," Greg said one afternoon after a meeting. "This isn't like you." I nodded, forcing a weak smile, but inside, I felt like I was crumbling. The nights were the worst. Alone in my small apartment, I'd lie awake for hours, replaying everything that had happened. The memories of Sophia's tears, her apologies, and her final betrayal looped endlessly in my mind. I hated how much space she still occupied in my thoughts. She'd destroyed our marriage, yet here I was, unable to let go of the life we'd built together. Sophia, too, was feeling the weight of her choices. Mutual friends told me she'd reached out to some of them, trying to explain her side of the story or ask for forgiveness. "She's a mess," one friend said during a phone call. "She knows she screwed up, and she's paying for it. But honestly, Adam, she still talks about you like you're her whole world." I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, staring blankly at the TV, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Sophia stood there, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her eyes were swollen, her hair unkempt, and she held a bag of groceries in her trembling hands. "I heard you weren't doing well," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let her in. She set the groceries on the counter and turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. "Adam, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't stand the thought of you going through this alone." Her words stirred a mix of emotions in me, anger, sadness, and a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. "You don't get to fix this," I said, my voice cold. "You don't get to swoop in and pretend everything's okay." "I'm not pretending," she said, her voice breaking. "I just want to help. Please, let me help." Her presence was a reminder of everything I'd lost, but it was also a strange comfort. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. But I didn't know if that was enough to make me let her back in. The next few days after Sophia's visit were a blur. I didn't invite her back, but her presence lingered in my thoughts like a ghost I couldn't exorcise. Her words echoed in my mind, "Please, let me help." A part of me wondered if she was sincere, or if this was just another desperate attempt to ease her guilt. My health continued to deteriorate. The chest pains became more frequent, and the fatigue felt like a constant weight pressing down on me. Work no longer provided the escape it once did, and I found myself barely able to get through the day. Sophia reached out again, this time through a mutual friend. "She's worried about you, Adam," the friend said over the phone. "I know things ended badly between you two, but maybe you should hear her out." I wasn't sure if I could. Her betrayal still felt like an open wound, and every time I thought about her, it was a mix of longing and resentment. One evening, after a particularly rough day, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the pile of unopened mail on the table. Among the bills and junk mail was a letter from Sophia. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I could handle whatever she had to say. The letter was short but heartfelt. "Adam, I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I can't sit by and watch you go through this alone. You don't have to let me back into your life, but please let someone in. You don't have to carry this all by yourself. Sophia." Her words left me feeling more conflicted than ever. I hated that she still had this hold over me, that even after everything she'd done, part of me still wanted to believe in the woman I'd loved for so many years. But life doesn't wait for resolution. One morning, I collapsed in my apartment, the tightness in my chest finally winning out. I woke up in the hospital, disoriented and hooked up to machines. The doctor's face was grim as he explained the severity of my condition, stress-induced heart complications that had gone untreated for far too long. "You need to make changes, Adam," he said. "Your body can't handle this much strain." As I lay there, staring at the sterile white ceiling, I felt an overwhelming sense of despair. My marriage was over, my health was failing, and I didn't know if I had the strength to fight anymore. Sophia showed up at the hospital later that day, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't say anything, just sat by my bedside, her presence both comforting and unbearable. I didn't have the energy to ask her to leave, nor did I have the will to let her stay. We sat in silence, the weight of everything we'd been through hanging heavy in the air. In that moment, I realized that some endings come not with a bang, but with a whimper, a quiet, aching resignation to the fact that life doesn't always give you the closure you seek. After being discharged from the hospital, I moved back into my apartment with strict orders to rest and focus on my recovery. The doctors told me the damage wasn't irreversible, but I needed to prioritize my health, physically and emotionally, or risk further complications. Sophia reached out several times after my hospitalization, but I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to face her, let alone sort through the tangled mess of feelings I still harbored. She'd visited me when I was at my weakest, and part of me hated her for that. Another part, though, was quietly grateful for her concern, even if I couldn't admit it out loud. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the failed reconciliation, the health scare, it all felt like a whirlwind that had left me standing in the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. Sophia's letter and her visits to the hospital had left an impression, but they weren't enough to erase the pain of her actions. Trust, once broken, wasn't something I could rebuild overnight, or maybe ever. Still, I couldn't deny that she was trying. Whether it was guilt or genuine remorse, I wasn't sure, but her efforts to stay connected told me she wasn't giving up. One evening, as I sat on the couch staring out the window, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could let this pain define me, hold me hostage to the past, or I could try to move forward, however slowly. Moving forward didn't mean forgiveness, not yet, anyway. It didn't mean letting Sophia back into my life either. But it did mean letting go of the anger and resentment that had been eating away at me. I picked up my phone and sent her a message. "Thank you for caring. I need space, but I'll let you know when I'm ready to talk." Her reply came quickly. "Take all the time you need. I'm here if you ever want to talk." In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding myself. I started going to therapy, taking long walks, and reconnecting with friends I'd drifted away from. Slowly, I began to find pieces of myself again. As for Sophia, our interactions remained limited. I wasn't ready to let her back into my life fully, and I wasn't sure I ever would be. But her continued efforts to reach out, her patience, and her willingness to respect my boundaries gave me some hope that, in time, I might be able to find closure, not just for us, but for myself. This story doesn't have a neat, happy ending. Life rarely does. But what I've learned is that healing isn't a destination, it's a process. Sophia's betrayal changed me, and the scars it left will always be there. But it also forced me to confront parts of myself I'd ignored for years, my tendency to bury emotions, my reluctance to ask for help, my inability to set boundaries. In the end, this isn't a story about betrayal or reconciliation. It's a story about survival. And though the path ahead remains uncertain, I'm still walking it, one step at a time.